My mother lifted my newborn daughter in her arms and threw her off a balcony. That's not a metaphor, that's not an exaggeration. It was my sister's baby shower at a luxury resort by the ocean. The champagne was flowing. The guests were laughing, and while I was reaching for a napkin, my mother walked to the edge and let go of my baby. My name is Isabelle Moore. I'm 29 years old, a single mother. And what happened that day didn't just break my family, it burned everything to ash. But even then, I had no idea that what came after secrets from decades ago, buried rage, and an unexpected savior standing on the rocks below would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, guilt, and love. Would you forgive someone who tried to erase your child from this world? What if that someone was your own mother? Tell me in the comments, have you ever been betrayed by the one person who was supposed to protect you? And if you want more stories like this, stories that stay with you long after they end, subscribe now, because this one doesn't just end at the balcony, it begins there. Now let me take you back to the morning it all started. Boston was already warm that summer morning. The air was thick with humidity clinging to everything, making even breath feel heavy. I opened the window of my second-floor apartment and let the distant sound of car horns and sidewalk chatter seep in. It was 6:45 a.m., and I was already running late. "Time to rise, sweetheart," I whispered as I turned to the small crib by my bed. My daughter Chloe stirred beneath a pale yellow blanket. Her tiny fingers curled in response to my voice. Her eyes, clear blue like the Atlantic in winter, slowly blinked open and tried to find my face. It always took her a few seconds longer, because Chloe, my 7-month-old miracle, was born with developmental delays. The doctors had said words like low muscle tone, possible cerebral palsy, and early intervention. But to me, she was just Chloe, my light in a life full of shadows. I bent down, kissed her forehead, and scooped her into my arms. "You and me, kid. Let's make it through another day." Being a single mother in this city wasn't just difficult, it felt like survival. By 7:20, I was balancing Chloe's diaper bag on one shoulder, her formula in a cooler, and her warm little body against my chest. Every day was the same drop-off at daycare, a crowded train to the accounting firm, 8 hours of spreadsheets lunch at my desk, then the mad dash home before daycare. Late fees kicked in, doctor appointments, insurance phone calls, laundry at midnight, crying in the shower, and somehow finding the strength to sing lullabies at 1 a.m. I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself, but the silence in my apartment, it had a way of echoing back every word that had ever hurt me, especially hers, my mother, Margaret Moore. She never accepted Chloe, never called her by name. To her, Chloe was that child. I could still hear her voice on the phone just the other morning. "If you insist on dragging that baby to another family dinner, at least dress her properly this time. I won't have her embarrassing us again." And yet, despite everything, I still picked up the phone when she called. I still said, "Yes, Mom," when she told me there would be a dinner that evening. Because Rachel, my older sister, the golden one, had an announcement to make. Rachel had it all. A perfect husband named Nathan, 2 bright, healthy kids, and a beautiful home with a kitchen island bigger than my entire apartment. And Mom, well, she worshipped her me. I was always the almost honor roll student, the almost successful daughter, the almost wife. Especially after Ethan, my husband, walked out when I was 7 months pregnant. One evening he said he needed air. He never came back. I never got closure. His phone was disconnected. His parents said he was dealing with something. No explanation, no apology, just silence. So I stopped asking, I stopped hoping, and I poured all of myself into raising Chloe. I looked up at the wall of my small living room. A wedding photo still hung there, a younger version of me beaming in white, holding Ethan's hand like we were building a future together. I hadn't had the strength to take it down. "Not yet," Chloe gurgled softly in my arms, and I smiled. She didn't care that her father vanished or that her grandmother looked at her with pity. She just needed me to show up, and I did. I always did. That evening, I'd go to that family dinner. I'd smile at Rachel's announcement. I'd endure the quiet judgments, the comparisons, the stares, because I was used to being the outsider. But what I didn't know then was that by the end of the weekend, my mother would do something so irreversible, so unthinkable, It would change everything we ever were. The restaurant my mother had chosen for Rachel's dinner was called the Harbor View, an upscale spot perched on the edge of Boston Bay. All glass walls and soft candlelight, the kind of place where the waiters wore white gloves and the children were expected to act like silent ornaments. I arrived 10 minutes late. The daycare had been crowded and Chloe had fussed all the way home. I'd barely had time to change into a modest navy dress before hurrying back out with her on my hip. Her red ribbon headband slipped down as we stepped into the polished marble lobby. When we walked into the private room, a hush fell. My mother Margaret was seated at the head of the long table, in a gray silk dress and pearls. Rachel sat to her right, glowing in her pale pink maternity dress, with Nathan and the kids beside her. "You're late," Margaret said, glancing at her watch. "I'm sorry," I replied calmly. Daycare took longer than usual. I asked for a high chair for Chloe, but my mother waved the waiter away. "Just keep her on your lap. I don't want her causing a scene. Like last time. She's a quiet baby mom," I said, but the words stuck in my throat. Rachel stood and took Chloe from me, kissing her gently on the cheek. "My sweet niece," she cooed. "You're getting so big," Chloe blinked slowly, her tiny hand clutching at Rachel's necklace. A flicker of happiness passed through me. At least someone in this family treated my daughter like a person. Rachel returned to her seat, still holding Chloe. I sat down and opened the menu without looking up. I already felt the weight of the evening pressing in, so Margaret asked, folding her hands. "What's the announcement?" Rachel and Nathan exchanged, knowing glances before Rachel finally said, "We're having another baby." Cheers erupted. Claps, laughter. Margaret stood and clapped the loudest. "A third child. That's wonderful news. A proper celebration is in order. I want a baby shower." Rachel beamed. "Something special," I was thinking. "The Cape Cod resort we visited last summer." "Perfect," Margaret said. "Ocean view, private terrace. I'll handle the reservations." Rachel turned to me. "You and Chloe must come. I want the whole family there." I nodded, forcing a smile. Of course, congratulations, but inside, something twisted. I hadn't even been given a baby shower. When I announced my pregnancy, Margaret's only reaction had been a thin-lipped sigh. When Chloe was born with complications, she didn't visit the hospital, didn't send a card, not even a text. Now the same woman was planning floral centerpieces and balloon arches. As the evening wore on, I fed Chloe bits of mashed potato with one hand and fielded small talk with the other. The conversations at the table flowed like champagne light, effortless, detached. No one asked how I was. No one asked about Chloe's therapy or the mounting medical bills or what it felt like to raise a child alone in a city that never slowed down. Instead, I got, "How's work? She looks sleepy, poor thing." Still no word from Ethan. No one said it out loud, but the message was clear. I didn't belong. Not here, not anymore. After dessert, Chloe began to cry softly. Her formula time was approaching. I stood and whispered, "I'll take her to the room and feed her. Be right back." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "She's disturbing the mood again." "She's just hungry," I said, holding Chloe tightly as we left. In the quiet of the guest room Rachel had arranged, I fed Chloe and rocked her gently, brushing back her soft dark hair. Her eyes fluttered shut, peaceful and warm in my arms. Tears welled in my own eyes. "You're perfect," I whispered. "No matter what they say, no matter what they see when they look at you, you are perfect." I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, listening to the ocean waves outside the balcony door. Eventually, I would go back out there. Smile, nod, say thank you, because I had to keep the peace. But that peace, so thin, so fragile, would shatter within hours. And when it did nothing, nothing would ever be the same again. By the time I returned to the terrace, the baby shower was winding down. Dessert trays had been cleared, champagne bottles half empty, and a few guests were preparing to leave. The ocean shimmered in the distance as late sunlight painted the waves in gold and gray. Margaret spotted me first. She stood near the railing, deep in conversation with Rachel and Mrs. Willard, Nathan's mother. When she saw Chloe in my arms, her eyes tightened. "She's settled now?" Margaret asked without warmth. "Yes," I replied. "She just needed feeding." Margaret's gaze dropped to Chloe. There was something unreadable in her expression, something harder than her usual coldness, a flicker of something I didn't recognize. "You had potential once, Isabelle," she said suddenly, her voice low and bitter. You could have been like Rachel, Mom, I said quietly. Please. Not tonight, this is Rachel's day. You made your choices, she snapped. You married the wrong man. You brought this. She gestured toward Chloe into our family. Rachel stepped in between us, visibly uncomfortable. Mom, stop. Please, Margaret took a long breath as if composing herself. I'm sorry, I think the child needs some fresh air. Before I could react, she reached out and took Chloe from my arms. Mom, what are you doing? I'll just walk her over to the balcony. Let her see the ocean, she said. Already turning away. Give her back, I said, my voice sharper now. Mom, I'm serious? But Margaret kept walking, Chloe resting on her shoulder, her tiny head nestled under Margaret's chin. The guests on the terrace fell quiet, sensing the tension. I followed her quickly, my heart pounding louder with each step. She stopped at the edge of the balcony overlooking the sharp cliffs and crashing waves below. The wind picked up, rustling her silk dress and tossing Chloe's ribbon. Mom, I said again, barely breathing. Please give her back. Margaret didn't turn around. She just stared at the sea, holding Chloe in both arms. High, too high. Mom, Rachel's voice cracked behind me. What are you doing? Margaret's shoulders stiffened. She whispered something I couldn't hear and then finally turned to face us. Her eyes glistened. Her expression calm, too calm. They took everything from us, she said. Who the Greens? Ethan's family. 30 years ago, they destroyed your father's business. Your father drank himself to death because of them, I blinked, stunned. What are you talking about? She carries their blood, Margaret said, looking down at Chloe. She's the product of betrayal, of punishment. No, I said, stepping closer. She's your granddaughter. She's my daughter. She's just a baby. Margaret took a step back. Her heel brushed the edge of the railing. I have to protect what's left of this family, she said. Protect, I whispered. You think this is protection? Rachel was sobbing now. Mom, please, you don't mean this. You're not well. Just give Chloe back. But Margaret's grip tightened, and then without warning, she lifted Chloe higher, her hands shaking, her face filled with something I will never forget. A look of complete conviction, and she let go. The scream that tore from my chest wasn't human, it was instinct. Pain, rage, grief. I ran to the edge, clawing at the railing just in time to see my daughter's small body tumbling through the air. Red ribbon trailing before disappearing behind the cliff's edge, Chloe. The terrace exploded into chaos. Someone yelled for help. Rachel collapsed to her knees. Nathan grabbed his phone, shouting for emergency services. Hotel staff rushed out from the lobby, but all I could do was scream. My arms reached for nothing. My voice cracked into wind. I tried to climb over the railing, but hands pulled me back. Ma'am, no, it's not safe. She's down there, I sobbed. My baby is down there, but there was nothing to see. Just rocks and waves and silence. Margaret stood frozen beside me, her arms empty, her face blank. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a breakdown. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This, was deliberate. Down there. Look, something's moving, the voice came from a hotel staff member standing near the edge of the terrace, pointing down the cliffside. My breath caught. For a moment, time stopped. I staggered toward the railing again, clutching the metal bar like it was the only thing keeping me on this earth. Through the blur of tears and sea spray, I saw it. A figure, an old man standing on a jagged rock ledge far below, holding something wrapped in red. Chloe. Oh my God, I whispered. Rachel came up beside me, her hands over her mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. That's her dress, she said. That's Chloe. She's alive. The hotel's emergency team rushed into action. Someone radioed the Coast Guard. A paramedic team arrived with harnesses and ropes. Police officers took statements, and another officer led Margaret away, still too stunned to resist. She just stood there, Rachel said. Shaking, she didn't even flinch. She meant to do it, I said softly. She planned this, but Chloe's alive. Rachel clutched my arm. That man, he caught her. Minutes passed like hours as the rescue team scaled down the cliff. The wind howled louder now, threatening to erase every hope with its bitter gusts, but then crackling through the rescue leader's radio. We've reached them. The child is responsive. No visible major injuries. We're bringing them up now. I dropped to my knees and sobbed. Not from relief, not yet. It wasn't over, but the weight that had crushed my chest since Chloe fell had finally lifted just enough to let me breathe. When the rescue team emerged with Chloe cradled in a paramedic's arms, wrapped in blankets, and crying, I collapsed all over again. My daughter was alive. I rushed forward and cupped her soft cheek with trembling fingers. I'm here, baby. Mommy's here. They put her in the ambulance with me as the doors shut and the sirens began to wail. I looked out the back window. Margaret stood in handcuffs beside the police cruiser. Rachel stood next to her, pale and still unable to look at our mother. At Boston General Hospital, Dr. Evelyn Tran met us at the emergency bay. She examined Chloe with swift, practiced hands and gave the first words that allowed me to fully exhale. She's incredibly lucky. Scrapes, bruises, but nothing life-threatening. We'll keep her overnight for observation. I nodded, unable to speak. Just held Chloe and kissed her forehead over and over again. That night in the soft blue glow of the pediatric ward, as Chloe slept beside me, a nurse entered with a message. There's someone here asking to see you, a Mr. Samuel Bennett. The name meant nothing until I saw him. The fisherman, tall, weathered by sea air, with calloused hands and soft eyes. He stepped into the room hesitantly, hat in hand. Miss Moore, he said, is your baby. Is she all right? She's alive because of you. I stood and hugged him before I could think. How can I ever thank you? I was fishing below the cliff. Same spot. I go every Sunday, he said, voice low. Saw something red falling, didn't think, just reacted. God must have placed me there. I wept into his sweater. He stayed for only a few minutes, said he ran a small tackle shop by the docks, gave me his card, told me if I ever needed anything I could find him there. After he left, I sat back beside Chloe. Her hand curled around my finger, and for the first time in months, I let myself imagine a future one, where we weren't just surviving, where we could begin again. The next morning, as discharge papers were being signed, my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach turn. Margaret Moore. She shouldn't have been able to call. She was in custody. But when I answered, her voice was quiet. Tired, Isabelle. I need to speak with you. Please come see me. There's something you don't know. I don't want your excuses, I snapped. It's about Ethan, she said, and your father. You need to hear it, I stared at Chloe. Then nodded. I called Rachel. She agreed to watch Chloe while I visited the police station. But on the way out of the hospital, I froze. Ethan Walker, my ex-husband, the man who abandoned me when I needed him most, was standing in the lobby. Hair longer, face older, but unmistakably him. Isabelle, he said, I saw the news. Is Chloe okay? What right do you have to ask that? I shot back. You left, you vanished, I know. And I have no excuse, but I have answers. And you need to hear them. I'm going with you to see your mother. It's all connected. I should have told him to leave. But something in his voice stopped me, so I didn't walk away. I got in the taxi and I listened, because what came next would explain everything. The police station smelled like old paper-stale coffee, and the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. I sat in the visitation room across from my mother, Margaret Moore, who looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her silver hair was disheveled, her face pale. She didn't meet my eyes at first, not until she saw who came in behind me, Ethan. Her expression twisted with something between horror and recognition. You, she whispered. I didn't wait. I wanted truth, not drama. You said you had something to tell me about Ethan, about Dad. Start talking. Margaret took a slow breath, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing anchoring her. 30 years ago, she began. Your father was preparing a major partnership with a firm called Walker & Co., run by Ethan's grandfather. It would have saved our family's company. Your father trusted them, put everything on the line. She paused. Her voice cracked. But at the last moment, they pulled out. Went with our competitors instead. It ruined us. The contracts, the trust, the investors, all gone. Ethan was silent. His face had gone pale. Dad turned to alcohol, I said, remembering long silences and slurred words from my childhood. He died of a heart attack when I was 12. Margaret nodded, but long before that, he'd already given up. I looked at Ethan. Did you know any of this? No, he said, his voice low. I only knew my mother hated your family. She said the Moores were dangerous and reckless. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want her money. That's why I never told you my full name. Then why did you leave? I asked Ethan. Looked at me. Then really looked. When Chloe's prenatal scans came back with possible complications, my mother lost it. She called her a curse. She threatened to cut off everything. Not just me, you said she'd ruin your life if I didn't leave. Tears welled in his eyes. So I left. I thought I was protecting you both. But I was wrong. I should have stayed. I should have fought back. I didn't know what to say. I had spent a year hating him, wishing he'd show up with an apology. Now I had one, and it didn't fix the past, but it explained the silence. Margaret was still staring at Chloe's empty stroller behind me. When you married Ethan, she said. I stayed silent. I thought maybe I could let it go. But when Chloe was born, and I saw her struggling, I snapped. I thought it was the universe mocking me. The daughter I lost to a rival family now had a child, just like him. You think Chloe is punishment, I said, my voice rising. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. I know that now, she whispered. But I didn't. Then I was blinded, and you almost killed her, I said, my voice shaking. That's not something you come back from. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Margaret said. I need you to understand how far hate can take a person, how deep it buries itself. I stood. I couldn't sit any longer. I'll never forget what you did, but I will protect my daughter from becoming like you. Bitter, broken, and cruel, I turned to go. Ethan followed. As we reached the door, Margaret said softly, "There's more." I looked back. Ethan's mother reached out. She said, She wants to meet Chloe, to make things right. I froze. That woman who saw my daughter as a curse. Why? I asked. Margaret gave a sad smile. Because seeing Chloe's face on the news reminded her what she lost, and what she nearly helped destroy. A month later, we stood in the garden of the courthouse. Ethan had legally adopted Chloe. She now bore both our last names. Dr. Evelyn said Chloe's motor skills were slowly improving with therapy. She was still delayed, but she was progressing. And then one afternoon, as the spring breeze blew gently over the grass, Chloe lifted her arms, looked up at me, and said, "Mama." My knees buckled. The tears came fast, but this time they weren't from grief. They were from hope. Later that same week, I got a call. Margaret had been sentenced to 5 years in psychiatric custody with mandatory treatment. She asked to attend our wedding if we ever had one. I didn't answer. Not yet, but that day will come. Because this story didn't end on the balcony, it began there. 3 months later, in the quiet backyard of a small home in the Boston suburbs, I watched my daughter crawl through grass. For the very first time, Chloe reached for a dandelion, her fingers clumsy but determined. She wobbled tip to the side, then laughed. That laugh, soft and high and unfiltered, was the sound that stitched my broken heart back together, one fragile thread at a time. Ethan sat beside me on the wooden bench. He looked different now. Lighter. Not because his past had been erased, but because he had chosen to face it. To rebuild from the wreckage, just like I had. I got the call, he said quietly. She wants to meet. I didn't have to ask who. Eleanor Walker, Ethan's mother, had requested to meet Chloe. To look in the eyes of the child she once called a curse, to undo, if only slightly, the damage her silence had caused. And I'd said yes, because if there's one thing I'd learned from all of this, it's that cycles don't break on their own. Someone has to stand up and say, enough. We invited both families to our small wedding. No grandeur, no gifts, just truth. Margaret was there, escorted, quiet, frail. Eleanor was there too, stiff at first until Chloe reached for her hand and cooed. And slowly, something shifted. When Margaret stood before the room and read the letter she had written from her hospital bed. I didn't cry because of what she confessed. I cried because for the first time in my life, she saw me, not as a failure, not as a mistake, but as a woman who survived. And Chloe. She wasn't a symbol of shame. She was the proof that love, real love, could survive the unthinkable. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to pass your pain on to the next generation. Chloe said Mama again this morning. She was sitting in the kitchen, reaching for her spoon with both hands, her face scrunched in full concentration. When she looked up and found me watching her, she smiled. That moment wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was everything. Because not long ago, I thought I'd lost her forever. And now, each small step she takes, each sound she makes, is a quiet rebellion against every label that was placed on her, every ounce of hate that nearly drowned us. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it allows space for healing. And healing, I've learned, is never linear. It's messy, painful, and sometimes begins only after the worst moment of your life. So if you've been through something that broke you, please remember, you are not the damage done to you. You are what you choose to become after. And your story, it's not over yet. If Chloe's survival, if her voice meant something to you, leave a comment below. Have you ever had to rebuild trust after a betrayal? Would you forgive your own mother if she crossed the line? Tell me where you're listening from, and don't forget, subscribe to EN Reddit Story, where real voices rise from real pain every single day. We don't run from the truth here, we speak it. And sometimes we survive it together.